Hello and welcome to the Durham Talents Channel. My name is Jesse Durham. I'm very pleased to have back for a second time Miss Robin. Actually, now that I think about it, you're going to be the first guest that I've had on more than once so far. Now that I think about it, I've had some clients on, some other professionals, an array of folks, but you're actually, if I'm not mistaken, you are our first time returning guest, but I'm back in studio with Miss Robin Washington. I know, you really are special. And so for folks that haven't been introduced to you, then I am going to suggest that they go and listen to our first conversation where we talked about so many different things. And you and I were just talking right before we started this podcast recording how there were so many talking points that we could have gone deeper in, but of course I was trying to get what your genesis looked like, what it looked like for you to be exposed to the infinite banking concept, what it looked like for you to begin a relationship with a professional that was coaching you through this concept, what it looked like for you to go through the application process, get the policy, pay those first premiums, use the policy for paying off the cars and the credit cards like you mentioned last time. And we're getting filled in on your life, which plenty of people can relate to at the same time, that you are a family and you're educating your children and career changes and just different things like that happened along the way of implementing infinite banking. And I feel like I'd like to return to some of those points. I was re-listening to that conversation. And all that to say that I'm suggesting that everybody go and listen to the first one. We did it in two parts because we had a good, nice, long conversation, and I knew that I wanted to have more from that time. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I had a great time doing our first podcast together. And like you, I look forward. There were so many things that we talked about that we could just take each point and go a little deeper. So I'm glad that you asked me back just to kind of share my own personal experience. So that's great.
I love it. And I'll tell you one thing that I was thinking about, because I am not in my home studio today. I'm in the office studio today recording this with you. And as I'm driving through and I'm leaving the country and I'm getting to the city and things like that, along my way, as I'm just looking at, new buildings being built and things like that, the American dream, I'm just sharing a thought with you, right, to start this conversation off, because it's so real life, I think. The American dream came to my mind, and I feel like many people think that the American dream isn't as possible anymore. And, of course, knowing what I know and knowing what you know, you could immediately relate this as well. If they knew what we knew about infinite banking, it's so much more approachable. If they knew what we knew about how, and what I want to get to at one point in this conversation with you at least is how to think and how to plan and how to act intergenerationally, because what your generation and my generation can do is make it so much more possible for the next generation to be able to pursue that American dream, I feel like. So that was just a thought of mine, and it made me think back, because I did go back and I listened myself to our prior conversation where you were talking about when you and your husband got your first policies, the boys were still pretty young, and you were looking at balancing a budget, and you're just being a mom, and you're, working on making sure they get a quality education and doing that yourself. And we homeschool, so I really related and connected on that. We could talk about that. But y'all were trying to pursue the American dream at that time. You were just trying to do well for yourselves. You were trying to do right by your sons and all those types of things. So I guess what I want to ask now is, we've heard some about your starting story. You're in the professional space now of coaching folks, of helping folks and teaching folks about infinite banking. My question would be on that point, what does it look like for you today as you talk with folks who are vetting this idea, who are being exposed to this idea of becoming their own banker, and they want to implement it, or they're considering implementing it because they also want to pursue that American dream? Can you talk to that point for us about the American dream and how infinite banking can help folks achieve it?
Yes, I can. Yes, what you said, Jesse, is that my husband and I, when we got our first policies, you know, I was actually in my 40s. My boys were uh, like early teenage years when we first got exposed to the infinite banking concept. And the thing that I have seen, I'm glad that my husband and I were open enough to receive the knowledge and the information, and that we actually started our policies then. I didn't, now I can look back because it's, been, I don't know, 15, 16, 17 years. So I can look back now and see what that decision that we made back then looks like today, and kind of what I share, with clients. Especially, I love my young clients because the goal is to think down the road, to look down the road, at where you want to be financially. And now I look at, what our family, our personal, my mom, dad, sister, brothers, kids, what we have done just in our own family. And, building this system generationally has been a game changer for not just my husband and I, but our entire family. And to this day, my kids, my sister, everybody still has their policies today because of, just understanding being back in control of your financial situation. That's the end game, is to get, back in control. So looking today, like, one of the things that I like to, just kind of share, especially with our young people, is the American dream is today, it's further out, I think, for young people than it was in my day. That American, the pricing of house, to get a house, the cost of, just living today costs so much more than it did back in my day. And I'm sure back in my parents' day and my grandparents' day. And which is why I really encourage people, you have to start now, building the lifestyle that you want in your future. You can't wait until you get there and go, wait until you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s year and go, oh, I wish that my lifestyle looked differently. And this is where the infinite banking concept comes in, because it in essence, it's putting your dollars to work now in your early years, so that when you get down the road, you've got this pool of money that you actually control, and that will allow you to do the things or have the lifestyle that you want in your life. Like I said, I was in my 40s when we got our first policy. I love talking to my young people that are in their 20s, because what I tell people, time is going to pass whether you do anything,
Yes.
In other words, every year the clock is ticking, so the question is, what is it going to look like for you 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road? Where is it that you want to be, especially financially? And so the earlier you can start this system and work on this system, because this system, time is something you can't, it needs time. It's got to build up, over time to be able to finance all the things of your life.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to give it time. And time is something you can't speed up. It's gotta, the time has to play itself out. So the earlier you can do this, the sooner you can do this. You give that dollar more time to build and to compound, so that eventually you are going to be able to get to that place, as Nelson points out, that you can finance everything in your life, that you are in literally total control of all of your dollars, but you got to start now. And so the American dream is not it is impossible if you're doing nothing. It's a hope and a gamble. You're hoping to hit the lottery, or you're hoping to marry some rich person, or you're hoping, that's a hope if you do nothing. But if you start, which is in your control right now, putting that dollar to work and allowing the years to work with you on that dollar, then eventually you can be at a place that you want to buy. If you need to buy a home, you can buy a home. If you need to, pay off your college, you can pay off your college, whatever it is. But the importance in my book is you have to start now.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Okay. So I'd like to break apart. Let's keep going right here. I'd like to break apart because I see these two avenues, because you and I both do talk with the folks that are in their 20s and 30s, and they're looking to make good money moves, and they might have this sentiment of the American dream is possible. And I understand that, because we do see, like you mentioned, housing's kind of crazy right now in comparison to maybe what I experience, you experience. And I'm a former teacher in North Carolina, for example. So what I'm saying is, in my real life, on my social media, I see former students or student age folks that are confronted with these interest rates the way that they are, the pricing of housing, in particular in housing. But here's the redeeming couple of qualities that I think about that age group. And here I'll probably pull up, you'll know what I'm talking about, Miss Robin. I'll probably put up a visual here to show folks again Nash's graph on the average American spending, right? And the biggest category there of what's spent is living expenses. He breaks it down into 4 parts: savings, auto, housing, and living expenses. The biggest category where folks spend money is living expenses. And what I'm saying is, here's where the young folks can begin to control things. They can look at that and say, well, okay, if on average I'm spending 40% towards this category of life, who controls that? Well, I do. Okay. And here's what I'm going to suggest, that they consider these principles from Nash's book as well, where they could be thinking long range, just like you're saying, right? And if you're going to think long range, that starting time is so important, because you only get to the long range by starting. So, but if you're thinking long range, and if you're willing to capitalize, something private for yourself, not spend all that you earn, but actually capitalize, right? And quit doing business with banks where you can, like those credit cards that have those 30% interest rates and stuff like that, right? Like we can choose that stuff. And that's the entry point, is maybe we don't start with the home, right? Now, on that chart, here's the second layer of intrigue, I think, is I've already said that living expenses, where the most money is spent, where the most interest goes, does tend to be housing. But we can't necessarily jump to housing, right? Like we probably need to start, like you said on our last recording together, and folks have perhaps heard from me, I started by paying off those smaller credit cards. When I got our policy and we wanted to pay off debt, just like you guys, we started with the little stuff, and we built up to a car, and we built up to other things, right? So you can't just necessarily start with the house, okay? But everybody could start by evaluating, hey, am I saving some of what I'm earning, and instead of spending it all, and do think long range and do get started. So I think that chart's just really important. And if folks are willing to sit down and compare what they spent last month, actually put it on paper if they need to, right? Or put it on an Excel sheet and compare, well, how am I doing? Am I saving money? Am I setting money aside? Am I spending too much here? There's nothing wrong with evaluating that stuff for oneself, because we often talk with folks too about their entry point to get started. And that's something you addressed in our last conversation too, was you and your husband figured out what was, and it was a stretch for y'all, but it was also doable to figure out a premium payment to make to your policies to begin your journey of financial independence. So I guess that's my encouragement to the young folks out there, but it's to everybody as well, right? To look at that chart, reckon with these principles, consider these principles that Nash embodies in his book of thinking long range, not doing business with banks and not being afraid to capitalize, being an honest banker yourself and rethinking your thinking. Those principles, if you'll adopt those principles, I think that's where you start to achieve the American dream. All right, but let me go back to you, Miss Robin, because that other group that you talked about, and I'm like you, I love an opportunity to talk to a younger person than myself because I see so much potential there of how they could get started better than I was able to get started, right? But then again, we do also have those folks that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're saying, was it too late for me? So I'd like to hear your response to, when you're talking with folks, how do you address that subject with the more mature folks on, they love this idea, but are they coming to it too late?
Right. That's an excellent question. I've gotten that question many times in talking with older clients, like, oh, Robin, I wish I had known this, when I was young, it's just probably too late for me. And it's not. Like I said, I was in my 40s when my husband and I got our first policies. He's about 5 years older than me. So I would say he was probably early 50s. The thing that I always say is that time and dollar go together. It doesn't matter what your age is.
I'm writing that down. Time and dollar go together.
They go together, right? They can work hand in hand, because none of us know when our end date is going to be. So starting a policy at any point is going to be great. Sure, the older we are, then, of course, the mortality factor and the amount of death benefit I can get for that dollar is going to change. True. But when it comes to the banking process, that is a moot point. It's irrelevant what your age is, right? So we're talking about, starting a banking policy. It doesn't matter your age because the banking portion or the aspect of the policy is going to be the same for a 20-year-old as it is going to be for a 50-year-old.
All right, back up and say that one more time for the people in the back. That last line that you said right there, I think that's so worth reiterating.
Yes, the banking portion of the policy is going to be the same regardless of whether you're a 20-year-old, a 50-year-old, an 80-year-old. The banking portion, the death benefit, yes, is going to be different because of our age. But is it too late to start? No. And one of the things I will share is when we introduced this to my own parents, my parents were in their, they were in their late 60s, early 70s, I think it was.
Okay.
When, my mom and dad, when we talked to my mom and dad about the infinite banking concept. And in their case, both of them, for different reasons, was not able to qualify personally for a policy on themselves just because of their health issues at the time. And that's one of the issues, or I guess one of the topics that I kind of talk about, why start now versus later? Because the typical process of as we get older, for most people, health issues become a factor. And that then becomes a factor when it comes to getting a policy on yourself. So my mom and dad weren't able to get a policy on themselves, but they still were able to have banking policies. So in their particular cases, because they're, late 60s, early 70s at that time, because of their particular situation health-wise, then all we did was pivot and they got banking policies on me and my sister. So they still own it.
Yep.
They still control it. They still have the banking function of the policy. It's just that the policies are on our lives instead of theirs. So all that means is that upon their death, there's no death benefit that will be paid out because they don't have policies on themselves, but they have the banking function that both my mom and dad have done, phenomenal things with their own the banking policies that they do have. But it'll be upon my sister and I's death that the death benefit will be paid out.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter your age in terms of a banking policy, in terms of getting in control of your dollars. One of the things that my dad, he says all the time, he just paid his premium on the policies that he has. My dad actually has three policies that he owns and controls. None of them are on him. They're all on, me and his grandkids.
Awesome.
So that's the thing, is that one of the things that my dad he says to me, he says, babe, this is one of the best things that I've ever had. He said, I've never had so much money at one time. And all he's been doing is paying his premiums, over the years, but he has control now of a nice little nest egg, so to speak, and that he uses. He pays for his. We go on road trips. He does his road trips. He's helped my sister buy a car. He's loaned, him and my sister had an arrangement when she needed to buy a car. So he's done things, with his policies, and it's just given him such a freedom. He's 88 years old now, but it gives him such a freedom to have this pool of money that he actually controls. He brought himself a new car. He's still driving at 80.
I love it.
He's still driving. But 2 years ago, he bought a car and he used this policy for his car, and he pays himself back. So does age matter when it comes to getting a banking policy? No. There are ways of getting a banking policy. We're talking about getting in control of your dollars, and that's where the banking portion of, the life insurance policy comes into play, and it doesn't matter what your age is.
Right. I love everything about that. So that's so helpful, I think, for folks. And there will also be, let me keep going in that same vein. There are some folks that they are at that older age and they see that this is good and they immediately want to go to the next generation. And you and I have already said, we love working with young people too. So when they're thinking about their own families, of course they think about that next generation. But the importance of, number one, I would say leading by example of getting a policy on yourself when you can, if you can. I mean, you said, your folks try to, they were uninsurable for whatever reason, and that happens to be the case for some folks. But it's still the number one place to start, in my opinion. Would you agree that it's the right place for someone to start on themselves if they can?
Exactly. Yes, I highly, highly recommend you start first on you, because for several reasons. Number one, you're the leader of your family line, so to speak. So you want to put the policy on you, and then you want the ability to pass on that death benefit to the next generation as well, which gives them the starting function. And if you're teaching the infinite banking process throughout the generations, then that money is just going to keep, they'll know what to do with it, and that money is just going to keep compounding. So yes, ideally, if you can get the policy on you first, you are the first, the primary person when it comes to putting a policy or deciding on who to put the policy on. You're the number one first. And then for whatever reason, if you can't put the policy on yourself, then we go to the next generation.
Right, exactly. And I love your actual example of your folks weren't able to get policies on themselves, but that doesn't mean they can't own assets that will then exchange hands to whoever they designate, without tax implications, which is so huge for generational thinking folks, for generational minded folks, being able to facilitate a an intergenerational transfer of wealth of either death benefit or assets or both, right? Assets being the properly structured policy, whole life policy with mutual companies that pay dividends, everything that we learn about in becoming your own banker. Just because you can't get the policy on yourself doesn't mean you can't own assets. I love the idea of your, 88-year-old dad helping and keeping more money in the family for car deals. And I remember y'all going on a road trip. I can't remember whether it was at the end of last year or the beginning of this year, but I remember that you telling me, yeah, we're on the road trip, Jesse. We touched base while y'all were out west somewhere or something. And I love that. I love that. Vacations, cars in the family, and then all with that end result of there's going to be a transfer of private assets from one generation to the next. I love it. 88-year-old with 3 policies. That's absolutely fantastic. Okay, so I've tried to get you to speak to our younger folks, and we do this on the daily. But of course, being able to record it right here, I think, so very helpful. Being able to speak to the older generations about starting with themselves, leading by example, I think that's very important. Would you then, regardless of age, because I wrote down what you said, time and dollar go together. I love that. Let's talk about, because again, I listened to our prior conversation before coming into the studio today, and I'd like to go a little bit deeper on, you are talking with folks on the regular about this idea of becoming your own banker. So am I. How important would you say is the client and agent or advisor relationship for those that are all the way from just first being exposed to this idea and considering implementing it themselves to folks like you and I that are thinking and already acting, intergenerationally? How important is that relationship with your agent or your advisor?
Oh, it's critical because for most people, I was going to say, I'll just say even myself, I never heard of infinite banking before. I heard of life insurance. I've heard of, whole life or term, but I had no concept or understanding of how to use a whole life policy as a living benefit. So for most people who are similar to me, that's not knowledge you gain along life's journey for the most part. So that's where that agent comes in, number one, to expose you, which is what we're doing right now, just putting together podcasts so that, people can kind of hear and learn of it. Then those that are interested in wanting to go deeper or wanting to learn more, again, that's where the knowledgeable agent on infinite banking comes to play to help develop that education aspect of, what infinite banking is and what it's all about. And then when you're ready to implement it, you go, hey, like me, this is very interesting. I don't understand it all. And I tell people all the time, you're not going to understand it. It's not going to be fully comprehended. You are going to be able to fully comprehend it just on a few sessions. It takes time to really understand the power of this concept. But if you were like me, you go, there's something there. So, hey, yeah, let's go on and get started. So you get started. The agent is important in that process, being able to design it and put it together based upon you and your lifestyle and your budget. So then now we've got the policy. It's like, okay, what do I do with it? It reminds me of when I had my first kid. It's like, okay, I got this kid. What do I do with it?
Right.
So it's similar, it's like, okay, I got this policy. What do I do with it? So again, this is where the agent comes to play because they're going to help you kind of walk and learn how to use this tool. So I always tell my clients, I said, hey, if you connect with me and we decide to put a policy in play, I'm your best friend for the rest of your life, or at least the rest of my life. Some of my clients are younger than I. So for the rest of my life, we're going to be best friends. And I give my clients, hey, carte blanche. You call me if you got any questions at any time. You give me a call because you're going to ask some of the same questions over and over and over and over again until it clicks. It's going to take a minute for it to click. As a matter of fact, I have a client right now. She's been my client for a few years now, and right now, as of this, recording, her and I have a weekly session where we are just going through the book and just going over questions, the questions that she has. And I told her the same thing. You're going to have a lot of questions, and sometimes it'll be the same question because I just told you, 2 weeks ago, but then it's like, okay, wait a minute, repeat that again. What does this mean? It's okay. Ask the questions, because the most important thing that you want to walk away with is the knowledge and the understanding. And what I tell my clients is, my joy is that you understand this whole infinite banking concept, because when you understand it, you can pass it to your family members, your friends. My goal is to work generationally through the family. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, that's what I want, is that we create family banking dynasties. In other words, family dynasties that are families that have multiple policies throughout their entire family, so that they're able to control a large pool of money and ultimately the things, finance the things in their lives. So that's why I want my clients and people to really understand the power of the infinite banking concept, not just for yourselves, but just so that you're able to then help your other family members, and we can pull everybody up, so to speak, out of this financial hole that, our world system has kind of gotten us into.
Yep, for sure. And I'll tell you why I asked that question from the start. But I do have that same mindset, and I try to plant that seed pretty early when I'm having conversations with a prospective client, that my goal is for their children to know who I am, and for me to be able to work with them, and then just as long as I can, right, to have that intergenerational relationship, even from a professional and a practitioner standpoint of, I want to be a resource to them. I don't want anybody to be dependent upon me. I'm actually encouraging them to become their own banker. But you talking about even having a sit-down call, going through a section of the book with a client, I love that. And I like to have as close of a relationship as folks would like to have in helping them understand this concept and apply it, all the while enabling them to be as independent financially and have the autonomy that they want to have. So I love your mindset. And that's one of the reasons why I knew I wanted to be able to get back on here with you. But again, I'll tell you what it was last week, real recent, I had a conversation with a sweet lady from Georgia in her 50s, and she had called a family meeting because they'd recently had, I think it was not one, but, 2 or 3 folks in their family, uncles, grandma, that nature, right? That prior generation to pass. And they thought that they'd had it all together, financially speaking. And then it just happened to turn out that they had been living really humble, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, when you know better, you can do better. And they realized that prior generation hadn't done the things that they just assumed that they had when it came to finances, and then some things needed to be covered, financially speaking. So that's not necessarily our starting point when we're talking with folks. It's about banking. It's about becoming your own banker. And yet we've also covered that aspect even in this conversation. So what I'm saying is there are people out there that want to do better, that are trying to learn lessons from the prior generation, and they're also wanting to implement some newer, better strategies for themselves, and then that will, bleed into the next generation's mindset and approach to legacy. So I did write down your term, family banking dynasties. I felt like that lady from Georgia, that's exactly, if she could have used your words, that's exactly where she would have described where she wanted to go, was create a big family banking dynasty for what they wanted to do, because they had plans on, being able to facilitate those final expenses, but also being able to do things like what you described your dad's able to do, is, do banking within the family when it comes to things like cars or homes, or, so-and-so's college education, or maybe help a family member launch their business, or maybe, give wedding gifts, but all from this family banking system. So it's just from real life conversations with prospective clients. I'm saying that some of these questions that I'm offering to you come from, because there are those people out there that are looking for something better, and then they end up finding something somehow, on the internet or through somebody that shares this concept to them, and then they end up on the phone with us, and then we're talking about, well, you're who I've been looking for, and they're saying, well, you're who I've been looking for, and it's a great thing to have a common language between you. They just need a process to implement to facilitate the desires that they have in their life when it comes to these types of financial aspects. I feel like
you and I are going to do more podcasts.
I'll tell you what. Well, let me tell you. So let me tell you this while I'm thinking about it. You saying we're going to do. We are. What was it? I meant to write it down, and I didn't write it down a second ago. When you were talking about going through the Becoming Your Own Banker book. So with a client, I've started a review series on my podcasting channel of the Becoming Your Own Banker book. And I'm probably about halfway through, a little bit more than halfway through. I think I've done something like 17 episodes so far. And I'm just trying to go, section by section. And it's not a replacement, for Nash's seminar or his book. It's just me trying to codify and share some of my thoughts and takeaways so that someone can come to it at their convenience and look at one section at a time. And I'm not saying that replaces you having a one-on-one time. That's so special. You having a one-on-one time where you're working through one section of the Becoming Your Own Banker book to help them, elevate their level of understanding of the concept. I think that's so good. I guess, let me ask you, beyond the Becoming Your Own Banker book, what were some of your favorite resources around infinite banking?
Oh, Carlos Lara's book on privatized banking was really good. I enjoyed that. I have to go over there and see. I did read Pamela Yellen's book on Bank on Yourself.
Okay.
That was another one. A book that I thought was really good that isn't per se about infinite banking, but it kind of gives you an idea or understanding of how our money system kind of started, a little history, is The Creature of Jekyll Island. That is another excellent book. And because I'm here in Florida, I actually made a point to go to Jekyll Island because it's not too far from where I'm at in Jacksonville, Florida. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's a good history foundational book on how our money system, how the Federal Reserve came into being and kind of why we are where we are. Another book that doesn't have to deal with per se infinite banking, but it helps you understand money principles, and it's more in I guess you could say a parable type format. But I think it's really good, and I encourage people to read, is The Richest Man in Babylon. Mm-hmm. That's another, and just since I mentioned The Richest Man in Babylon, one of the principles that it talks about is not consuming everything that you get, right? The Richest Man in Babylon, the parable is basically he becomes rich because he understands the principle that you have to put back, so to speak, a portion of your money to put it to work for you. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of paraphrasing everything, but I bring that up because I'll circle back to something that you said at the very beginning, is you've got to start someplace. And you have to start with your dollar and understanding that your dollar, you can't consume all of your dollar and somehow expect to achieve financial greatness. If you're constantly consuming all of your dollar, the law of money is you will never achieve financial greatness. But somehow we don't have that understanding, or somehow we're misled that you can consume, and somehow you're going to end up, with financial greatness. So one of the things that I gleaned from the richest man in Babylon is the importance of at least taking 10% of, that dollar and putting and sewing it, putting that 10% to work. So that's a principle that works. It's a law of money, I call it, that works. When you take a portion of your money and you sow it so that it can work for you. And in essence, we kind of talk about the infinite banking being a tool to do that. You take a portion of your dollar and you put it into a vehicle that allows it to compound over and over. Then over time, again, time still becomes a factor. Over time, that dollar is going to help you get closer to that financial greatness, if you will, whatever that number is for yourself. So that's a book that, and of course, Rich Dad Poor Dad was my beginning with Robert Kiyosaki. So definitely, I highly recommend that book because just again, I think we just all have, because they don't teach money in school per se. When I went to school, we did have economics. I do remember in high school having economics, but these days, money is not taught in school. And so most people don't know how money works, but there's laws around money, just like, there's the law of gravity. Everybody knows the law of gravity. If you try to come up against the law of gravity, you're going to hurt yourself.
Right.
It doesn't matter who you are, rich, poor, black, white, it doesn't matter. You're going to experience what the law of gravity is. So I always talk about there's laws that are around money. But the problem is we don't know those laws. So we violate them all the time. And then, 10, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road, we realize we're not financially where we like to be. As a matter of fact, we are just superly in debt. And so anyway, there's so many books I could probably list that I've read. Next time you know what, that'll be our next podcast.
That's good. That's good with me. I've not even read all those that you mentioned. I've not read. I've read maybe half of the ones that you mentioned, and I was aware of the ones that I haven't read. But here's what I'll say. And this time always passes so quickly for me. And I'm very encouraged to hear you say that you're more than willing to do some more with me, because I would like to as well. There are so many notes that I'd like to ask you about. I mean, we didn't even begin to cover the extent of the family banking system that you've built. But I do think that you've done a lot in, number one, helping people be exposed to these money laws, and then also to encourage them to make positive efforts that will change their trajectory if we don't recognize those laws and account for them in our own private lives. And, for you as well as for me, that first step is becoming your own banker. It's whatever it is that moves us in that direction of understanding what it is and then actually implementing it and getting started. So I'll make sure to put information again in the notes, Miss Robin, about how folks can get in touch with you. Of course, everybody that knows me, I'd love to be able to hear your takeaways from my conversation with Miss Robin. If you have suggestions for things that you'd like to hear us cover next time, I've already made some notes, Miss Robin. I'd like to talk to you about some certain things. I'd like to ask you more questions, both as an individual and as the professional that you are. But I'll make sure to put your contact info here in the notes. Do you have any closing remarks for the folks?
Oh gosh, my biggest encouragement to everybody is money is something that you have to deal with every day. Every day you have to deal with money. You've got bills to pay, you've got groceries to buy, you are in need of repairs for something, The money, it amazes me that we have to deal with money every day, but our knowledge about money is so small. It's like we know nothing about it. And that really is what started my journey in the first place, is because I recognize that I'm trying to make money decisions, but I don't know nothing about money. It's like I know how to work for it and I know how to spend it on whatever it is that I need, but I don't know how to elevate my life from one financial platform to the next. I didn't know how to do that. So the thing that I encourage people is educate yourself. Don't be afraid to learn. Take the time out. The other thing is we're so busy that, I don't have time. But wait a minute. Money is something you deal with every day. And do you realize that if you had more money, you can control more of your time, meaning that you don't have to go out and work a 9-to-5 job or be at somebody else's beck and call. If you had more money, the only reason that you're in the position that you're in is because you don't have enough dollars to do the work for you. So you've got to go out and do the work yourself. So I always tell people that educating yourself about money, to me, in my personal opinion, it's not an option. If you want to have the lifestyle that you spend your waking hours thinking about, So my encouragement is to educate yourself. People like you, Jesse, that are putting out the content, the information. And I encourage people, take the time to listen. Go get some of these books that they're recommending and reading. That's all I did because when you open a book and you start to hear the thoughts of those that have gone before you and what they write about, it begins to change your mindset. It helps you to understand and it helps you to do things differently. Now my decisions are different now that I have my banking system. My decisions are much different than when I didn't have my banking system. But that came as a result of being open to hearing and learning about the infinite banking process and learning about money in general. I'm not saying I am not a financial, stock person or, a financial quote unquote guru. I'm just your average everyday American that desires and dreams about a lifestyle that she would like to have. And what I recognize is in order for me to get to that lifestyle, I need dollars to do it with. But how do I do that? That's where I was at. How do I get the dollars to get to the dream, the visions that I have for me and my family? So that's where the education comes in. That's where I had to start learning and being open. So that's always my closing remark is just educate yourself, get educated, because when you know, you will do differently. Even in the Bible, the scripture says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So you know what? Change that outcome by being open to educate yourself.
Yep. I love it. And if that's always going to be your closing remark, I'll just keep asking the same question because that's my philosophy as well, that education should be. And I'll give you a scripture to match yours because just a couple of moments ago, I had this scripture across my mind of, will you save the best for last? Where the wine was turned or the water was turned into wine. It's like, you save the best for last. I feel like we had a great conversation all along, but right here at the end, it's just like you're giving one-liner after one-liner after one-liner. So I appreciate you ending on education. I'll make sure to let the folks be able to contact you in whatever ways that I can. And I really do look forward to our next conversation, Miss Robin. Thank you so much for being back on here today. I hope you have a good rest of your day and we'll talk again soon. Okay.
Thank you, Jesse.
Fantastic. I hope that was a great pleasure for you like it was for me. If you'd like more information about how to implement the infinite banking concept into your household, your business, or your investing, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Check out my free presentation or get in my calendar at durhamtalents.com. Have a great day. Take care.